Adding juice to your game is a crucial part of game dev, and many of you know that already. But do you know what kind of juice to apply? Not every juice is created equal, and having the wrong kind is the best way to break your game visual identity. In this video, I'm discussing major types of juice with examples. Note that this is mainly coming from my experience and vibes. It's not an exact science. The idea is to understand the rules so you can adapt them to your game and style, and of course, break the rules when needed. I made a video sharing tips and tricks to animate UI recently, and I asked you if you wanted me to dive into the different kinds of juice. You said yes, so here it is. Let's start. I think the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about juice is the cartoony, over-exaggerated look. We often see this style in indie games, especially the ones with simple visuals. Game jams, prototypes are often using this. Baltro is an example of that, but in a quite moderate way. The style is characterized by very exaggerated squash and stretch, rotation, and very springy easing. The way I see it is it's a way to compensate for the simple graphics, or a way to make the most of these graphics. Because the visuals are simple, you have the freedom or maybe even the obligation to compensate using extreme juice. There are a lot of examples of that. I come across them very often while browsing Twitter. Here on screen you can see some examples. There's this incremental button game, this 3D prototype from Twitter, SNKRX, Shell Divers, even Balatro. Balatro is in this style, but quite calm, I would say. This kind of juice insists on the tactile feel of elements. Everything reacts and reacts strongly to your input. Hovering, clicking, holding, everything is rewarded with multiple effects and sounds. I talked about squash and stretch earlier, and it's quite important here. The X and Y components are stretched like crazy, and often not at the same time, to get a feeling of distortion. On top of that, the easing is very often quite aggressive. We'll come back to easing in just a second, but it's usually ease out and trends back, or transelastic. The effects in this style are reminiscent of early cartoons with exaggerated movement and noodle-like arms. It almost feels like playing with a toy. It's supposed to be fun, engaging. The goal is to make the design approachable, inviting, and rewarding. It goes very well with arcadey games, incrementals, and games that are not so serious in general. It goes well with rounded shapes, big outlines, bright colors, and even some pixelated games that are not afraid of skewing pixels. This style is very cool because it can really elevate games with simple visuals. Don't be fooled though, gamers might not be 100% in love with it. I would argue that lots of players would prefer better graphics in terms of better art, drawing, etc. than having a lot of juice. As game devs, our perception is heavily skewed. This style is so over the top that you will often find hit flashes on elements when they're interacted with or used. Usually hit flashes are reserved for hits, like hitting an enemy, but in this style you can use hit flashes when an upgrade is used, for example, or when doing an important action like purchasing something. Achieving this in Godot can be done using ease out and trends back on your tweens to have a very snappy feel with a slight overshoot. Usually, combining scale and rotation gives a nice feel. You can also ease out with a trend spring and a long duration to get that springy effect that lasts a long time after the user has made their input. It feels almost organic, very tactile. And of course, you can also use an actual spring behavior using the famous spring equation. I made a video about that you can watch it here if you're interested. Making these videos takes time and makes basically no money, so if you want and you can support me, you can join the Patreon or do a one-time donation on Ko-fi. Of course, the best support is buying my games. My latest release, Lexispell, is a roguelike word games, and I'm now working on Obol, a horror game about betting your life on a coin flip. I also offer consulting sessions about game dev, UI, and juice, and I do freelance, so don't hesitate to hit me up. All the infos are in the description. Thank you for your support. Let's go back to the video. The next juice type is what I would call abstract, and I also put in this one neon futuristic. They can feel different, but I believe they have quite a lot in common. You can find them in games where the visuals are simple, in some games almost abstract, or in games where the art style is futuristic. In this style, things move quite fast if they move. You have a lot of glitch, transition, like elements blinking in or out, and you can also use reveals, like elements scaling out like an hologram appearing. They're similar because they represent something that doesn't necessarily exist. In abstract games, the UI is not trying to be a representation of something that exists in real life. And in futuristic games, most elements are animated because, again, it feels very computer-like. So text can appear like on a prompter, images can blink in, and decorations elements can also be animated. It feels precise, fast, and again, computer-like. To achieve that, you can use ease in and out for things that should move smoothly, usually no overshoot as it would feel too cartoony, and again, it's supposed to be precise. If you want really fast transition, Trans Expo can be a nice transition, combined with short durations. Usually durations are small because elements are abstract. You can play with modulate or visibility to make things appear or disappear in a glitchy way, like a blink. The next category is very different from what we've seen. In this one, the elements take their time. We usually play a lot with transparency and smooth and slow movement. I call it smooth classy. You find this style in narrative games, story or art-focused games, maybe even puzzle games. You can find them in horror games too, and the reason is simple. The apparent calmness of the animation contrasts or complements very well the tension created by the horror setting. In this style, elements fade in and out, panels slide in and out slowly, elements are rarely rotated, and scale is used very sparingly. If it's used, it's smooth and slow. You can see this one as a complete opposite of cartoon. To achieve that, you usually use ease in and out with a transition cubic, or anything that doesn't overshoot or ramp up too fast. The smooth ease in and out feels calm and doesn't pop in your face. You use quite long durations or a combination of initial fast movement with a secondary movement that is much slower to have like a smooth finish. Think of it as a limousine stop. You combine movement with transparency to ease the appearance of stuff appearing and disappearing. In AAA games, you often what I would call realistic juice. This means most things will be animated, but usually it will just be smooth or very adapted to the type of UI it's using. For example, buttons will have a simple hover state, like showing an underline or changing opacity. If you're interacting with something that is futuristic, you'll have a blink in and out, or a change of opacity. The juice there is often a representation of how things would behave in real life. The core of the game is put on the animation of the characters and the VFX. The goal is often to mimic reality, so you won't see squash and stretch or unrealistic rotation. It doesn't mean it will be as flat as reality though, just that the attention is drawn to where they put the most amount of effort, so environment, characters, and animations. You could argue that they don't need the juice because they put all of their effort in the animation and VFX, whereas indies have to compensate with juice. The UI in these games will usually be close to smooth, classy, but again, it depends on the kind of game. So you might be closer to neon futuristic if the game requires it, like Cyberpunk. Achieving this kind of juice is relatively similar to what we've seen before, so smooth, classy, and of course you need to adapt it to the project. If the realism is more technology-based, like in the latest 007, then it's going to be more futuristic sci-fi.
That'll do. Thanks.
Another style I can think of is something I'd called anime or high-res 2D, basically a juice style that relies heavily on a lot of textures and high-quality assets. You can see it in Persona, for example, but also Might Rhea, Blaze Blue, Entropy. I call it anime because this style reminds me of animes where you have very over-the-top effects and sometimes almost comic-like effects, like the background changing behind the character or the screen being teared by a character attack. Usually this juice is combined with high-quality 2D or 3D assets, and of course can take multiple forms, sometimes cartoony, sometimes sci-fi. It works really well with stylized art and is almost cartoony in the way it's exaggerated. It relies heavily on VFX, so it works really well for combat-focused games. The assets used for the effects are often hand-drawn and rarely fully procedural. While most games are using assets for their effects, I'd argue that in this style, the VFX are the core juice components. They reward the player for playing well, enhance the action, and turn simple things like mundane combat into very memorable cinematic moments. You find some of that in fighting games, most notably Street Fighter, where rewarding the hit is very important and you want to make the various attacks feel very rewarding. In some ways, it's really close to the next style I'll talk about, classic/old school, because it uses a lot of sprite sheets and textures, but it also makes heavy use of procedural techniques. We find this mainly in high-res 2D games, but it also works in some pixel art games, especially the ones where they use procedural techniques and stretch pixels. Some examples of that style can be found in Might Rea, Blaze Blue Entropy, or /Zero. The tweening is going to be dependent on if you want a more sci-fi or cartoony effect, but the real important part is the visuals, the textures that are being used. All of that is made using shaders and particles, and this style really makes use of that a lot. So you have to have high quality textures that are very stylized in some cases, and that take a huge amount of space. The last style I can think of is what I call classic or old school. Think of a pixel art game with lots of effects but mostly rigid pixels. The pixels are not skewed or stretched, everything is hand-drawn, and the game relies a lot on sprite sheets and hand-drawn animations. Most of it, if not all the effects, are done using sprites. This is why I call it classic or old school, because it doesn't use procedural techniques like tweens or particles. It makes animating everything very time-consuming, and it can give a blocky feel, because things don't stretch or rotate that much, and the animations might be a little bit stiff. A recent example of that is Marvel Cosmic Invasion, but I think Gravity Circuit is also a good example. This one is getting rare because of the amount of work it requires, but it also gives a very specific look, which is super cool, but feels very nostalgic and old school. It's a strong style that won't work for most people. What I'm trying to show you with these examples is that juice is just an extension of your art direction and art style. It needs to fit because it's telling the users how the game interacts and reacts to player input. You sometimes see strong reactions to very juicy games because gamers are not necessarily used to it. If you play only AAA games, you never saw the indie juice we might be familiar with. I often see people on Twitter reacting to gameplay from some Roblox games as if they just witnessed the worst thing human created. When I look at it, I find it cool. Yeah, the camera moves quite a lot, but the feedback is strong and quite cool. Much better than any shitty Pokemon games out there. Sorry, Pokemon fans. But these people are probably not used to that, so they immediately categorize the game as something bad, that is made for kids with low attention span. Obviously, you should not care about what they think, but the message is that juice should match the rest of your game. To emphasize that point, I want to talk about the trap to be aware of. Having very high quality art and applying the wrong juice or applying no juice. We see that often with games made by very talented artists that might not be familiar with games. The result is a game that looks incredibly good, but feels very stiff. Of course, we're talking about a game where the animations would not be baked in the art. So you have beautiful art that almost feels slapped in the world as they don't really react to anything. This can also be the case with developers commissioning art. They might not have access to the separated layers to affect juice separately, or simply might be incapable of juicing it up. In my opinion, this is a big risk because the players will feel a disconnect between the high quality of the art and the low quality of the juice and game feel. While it's not exactly the same, but we kind of see the same thing happening in AAA games with interactivity. Because the environments are becoming super detailed, things can't be interacted with to the same level as something like Half-Life or any other game from that era. It means that you have a lot of props everywhere, the environments are very detailed, but practically nothing can be interacted with because it would require too much from the computer or even from the teams behind it. I see it as something similar to having very high-level art that doesn't really move or doesn't really feel interactive. Remember that video games are interactive, so it doesn't need to be just pretty, it also needs to be interactive and show that it's being interacted with. This is exactly why we have game feel and game juice. If you want to know the difference, I made a video about that, linked below. I showed you a few categories, but it doesn't mean they are the only one to exist. I'm pretty sure you could think about other categories or even merge some of them together. What matters is that you understand how certain effects create certain reactions. I can't tell you what effect is going to evoke what reaction, so you have to study it over time and form your own judgment. One of the best approach to know what kind of juice to apply is to look at other games. We are super lucky nowadays and we see a bunch of games in details. Many devs share what they do on socials and sometimes even tips and tricks. I did just that with my game Lexispell and how I animate UI if you're interested. Game UI database is also a great resource, but specifically for UI. It's sorted by genre, UI type, etc. So that can be super useful to study games. The first step is always to learn by copying. So just pick a game you like, analyze the juice and try to replicate. Most of the time, the techniques are the same. It's just that the values are different. If you really don't know how to do something, just ask around or reach out to the dev. I know I often share how I personally do things, and I know many other devs do the same. This is of course if you don't have your own style yet. Some people already have a strong visual identity, and for them it wouldn't necessarily make sense to adapt their juice to the game. It's probably going to be better if it's the other way around. If you want to go further and learn about game juice, I made a course about game juice that has been out for a while. People seem to love it, so I guess you can check it out on Udemy. It will teach you the techniques I'm using in Godot to make game juice with a concrete example. We start with a breakout game that has no juice at all, and we make it juicy at the end of it. And if you see this around the release of the video, I'm running a promotion right now, so you can get the course on a discount. Link in the description. I hope you found this interesting. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you're struggling with Juice, you want to work with me, I have consulting sessions, I do freelance for Juice and UI, so don't hesitate to hit me up, link in the descriptions. I also have a bunch of other videos about game juice that you can find right there. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!